At the turn of the millennium, a strange game appeared on the Sega Dreamcast. It was obviously made as a joke, but it is a full-fledged commercial video game. The game was called Typing of the Date. And yes, it is a dating sim where you pursue love by typing stuff. Typing of the Date seems pretty chill. Sadly, my Nihongo is not jozu enough to overcome the language barrier, so I can't tell you much about it. But I have a lot to say about Sega's Typing of the Dead, a game wilder than the last summer of my teens. In this game, you do one thing only. You type zombies to death. It can be as simple as typing a short word like gasp or stare, or why is the sky blue, or macromolecule absorbance sheet, or FTP, DNS, HTML, BBS, FAQ, POP, URL, TCP, HTTP, IOU. Typing of the Dead originally came out in the arcades in 1999, with ports to the Dreamcast, PC, and PlayStation 2 following soon after. It is a reworking of House of the Dead 2, a beloved light gun game also made by Sega. In a genius move, Typing of the Dead retains the same basic content of House of the Dead 2, but instead of blasting zombies with guns, you use keyboards, which is how it should be, both in fiction and in real life. The game never explains why this is the case or how it works. It's confident that you won't care. If you've never played Typing of the Dead, it's easy to write it off as just some dumb thing for millennials to be nostalgic about. But surprisingly, it's kind of a perfect game, and I'm not joking. It introduces a novel gameplay concept and fully explores it. It's one of the funniest games ever made, with a tongue of fire and like 3 layers of comedy firing all at once. And it's as enjoyable now as it ever was. This game hasn't aged. It's matured in a cask of finest video game oak. In life, joy and inspiration can be found in the unlikeliest of places. A schlocky game about killing zombies by typing may just be the unlikeliest of them all, but that just makes it all the more fun. And Typing of the Dead is all about fun, but not just in the way that you'd expect. What, if any, is the value of being unique? It's something that we seem to hold in high regard, like we've all heard a game being praised for its unique gameplay or unique art style. But if you look at something real popular, like say Fortnite, it's not like Epic is doing something that you've never seen anywhere before. They're taking concepts from other games, adding some twists of their own, and just making it a polished experience. And I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. After all, just being unique doesn't automatically mean that the unique thing you're doing is worth doing, or that you manage to execute it well. However, when you do encounter something that's not novel just for novelty's sake, and it's also done really well despite being the first attempt at it, well, I feel like there's something special in that moment. It's like when you just start dating someone super nice and you get that surge of new relationship energy. You feel invigorated. There's a sense of wonder to the world once again. You're drunk on the possibilities in your mind. This intoxicated state cannot be maintained forever, and you don't want to be constantly chasing after it, but it does change you, and it is essential to the human experience. I guess this is a way of me saying that I have a crush on the Typing of the Dead. The flame of our romance enters long dormant periods, but never burns out. You could say we're happily stuck in the kiss in an elevator phase of a relationship. And though this may be a little superficial of me, the first thing that got my heart racing about the game was how unique it was, and how effortlessly refined it seemed about it. I mean, the game is about fighting a zombie Armageddon in full-on office suits. Function is nothing, style is everything. That said, the next section of this video is for all you function junkies out there. What exactly makes Typing of the Dead so irresistible to actually play? It's safe to say that typing isn't anyone's idea of an exciting time. It's something that we associate with work or mundane activities rather than video game fun. Now remember, typing is the one and only thing that you do in Typing of the Dead. But in the face of all expectations, this translates into thrilling, satisfying, and deep gameplay. Typing of the Dead puts you on the spot the moment it starts, and it never lets up. When you see those rotting undead lumbering towards you, you know you're in trouble. So you kindly type REDC2. You bang out that macromolecule absorbent sheet. Your fingers dance to produce, and I quote, "On behalf of all zombies, I'd like to issue the following statement. Typing doesn't kill people, but it seems to kill lots of zombies." And it does. Each letter you type results in immediate feedback with a loud shot and chunks of the enemy flying off. And if you miss, you can instantly tell it's happening by that sound effect. If an enemy starts closing in on you, it's indicated by a flashing red text box. I'm pointing out these seemingly small details because they're instrumental in making you feel like you're in the heat of the action instead of composing an email or something. Some enemies throw projectiles, which forces you to switch targets to avoid taking damage. With multiple enemies on the screen, you may need to be smart about who to prioritize. There's even these miniature challenges which can be pretty tough. Surviving a nasty group of enemies gives you a rush, and taking hits stings, just like in any good action game. It stings especially if you've lived in Europe all of your life, and suddenly you need to type in apostrophes and other punctuation marks by guessing where that stuff is on the American layout that the game uses. It's like having a mandatory extra challenge mode on all of the time. Anyway, in a sense, the best compliment I can give to Typing of the Dead is that it makes you forget that what you're doing is typing. Just like playing a first-person shooter makes you forget that on a fundamental level, you're just clicking on stuff that appears on the screen, like a fast-paced hidden object game or something. The illusion is complete. You are not punching in letters. You're on a roller coaster ride through an undead apocalypse. What elevates this beyond mere novelty is the variety on offer and the high skill ceiling. Typing of the Dead fulfills the ideals of arcade gaming in that it is immediately engaging, but it also wants you to come back for more, and it does this by throwing cool stuff at you non-stop. For example, there are fun power-ups that you can get if you manage to hit a letter that is visible for just a fleeting moment. And my favorite one is the genre dictionary, which gives you thematically linked words for a while. Like here, you can see me fighting the zombie outbreak by typing different varieties of cheese, of which there are surprisingly many. I wouldn't even know what Wensleydale was if Wallace and Gromit hadn't been my favorite cartoon as a kid. There's jokes within jokes hidden here, like how in this playthrough, I got this string that went from payroll to toilet roll to rock and roll to spring roll and finally to carol. The boss encounters switch up the gameplay even more. You may be forced to do your typing in stop and start spurts, which can really throw you off if you need to resume in the middle of a word. After all, our brains usually process words as whole units instead of separate letters. There's an endgame boss that hits you for every typo that you make, really leaning into that old school corporal punishment way of teaching. And by the way, seemingly for no reason whatsoever, all the bosses are themed after tarot cards, making this the second best tarot-based video game I want to cover on this channel. By far the coolest boss in the game takes the form of this three-headed hydra that asks you a question that would be super easy to answer if you had more than a second to think about it. I mean, I know that Peking dork is not a Chinese food, but my brain saw Chinese food, Peking and a word beginning with a D and jumped straight to conclusions. A lot of the challenge here revolves around this kind of deception. Which one can swim? Anchors, dead fish or octopi? Which one is alive? Human remains, petrified trees or deadly snakes? Which is a class in school? Zits 101, history or daydreaming? You can see how they're playing with meanings, like the fact that you often daydream in class. Some are just for laughs instead of trying to trip you up, like something to do before you go to bed, read a book, hold meetings or invent wheel. I mean, surviving in the modern day job market feels like you should be holding meetings and inventing wheels every minute of the day, but it's really not good for you. I'm glad Typing of the Dead advocates for leading a healthy lifestyle. Even with all this Peking dork stuff, at the end of the day all you do is type, and there is only so much ceaseless typing action you can take before tiring out. That's why many action games include some quieter moments of exploration or light puzzle solving, so you can catch your breath and get hungry for more. But with Typing of the Dead, when it's on 200%. But it compensates by being only around 40 minutes long. It's quite the workout for your mind and fingers, and you'll be happy to roll the credits by the end, which are of course typable as well. But it's the kind of satisfied happiness where you're glad to have gone through the whole thing. And unless you're playing the arcade version, which, let's be honest, none of us are, you can also choose to play any of the individual levels, which are plenty fun on their own too. Typing of the Dead is an excellent game to pick up and play for 10 minutes if that's all you have. It's very replayable in general, and that's by design. On your first go, you'll probably just try to survive the zombie typing onslaught, but there's a counter that keeps track of how many phrases you've typed without making any mistakes, and the level end screens inform you of how well you did in general, urging you to always try and do a little better. Even if you're playing just to enjoy the wackiness, you may want to return to the game to see all the alternate routes that depend on the citizens that you manage to save. Just take a look at these two stage 2s, which go into an entirely different direction right from the start. This kind of design sadly drops off towards the end of the game, but still, what you see is slightly remixed every time you play, which makes the experience all the more tasty. But what really makes Typing of the Dead infinitely replayable are the randomized text boxes. The game has a deep enough reserve of text that unless you become an obsessive speedrunner of the game, you'll be typing new material for a long time. This is a masterstroke in economic game design. Creating new action set pieces takes a lot of time and effort. Inserting new lines of text does not, and it keeps the game fresh for a very long time. You can't just memorize all the enemy locations and be done with it. You need to improvise. Since we started talking about text, how about we close the book on gameplay for a while and delve deeper into what makes this game a true GOAT? Let's talk script, tone, and trash. In the intro, I mentioned how Typing of the Dead works its comedy magic on multiple levels, and the first one is obvious. It's the collision of a zombie shooter with what is essentially a typing tutor, complete with tutorials on how to touch type. It may just be one of the best educational games ever made, while also being the absolute lowest tier gory horror garbage. It's a monstrously competent combination of two worlds that never should meet. In the tradition of all great surreal art, Typing of the Dead makes your brain come to a grinding halt. There's just no way to make sense of what's happening in this game, but after the initial confusion, this mindlessness resolves into laughter. It's the laughter of delight and freedom, and it permeates all aspects of the game, including the stuff that you type. If you're not one of those people who only listen to YouTube videos instead of watching them, and if you are, I love you. But if you have been watching this video up to this point, you have a good idea of what the text in Typing of the Dead is like. This has to be among the most creative and inspired localizations in all of video games. It's like curated chaos where no one line seems to have any relation to any of the others. But there is still a consistent voice, a consistent flavor of stupidity to them. Maybe a better way of describing it would be as the world's longest non sequitur joke that is created anew every time you play. Non sequitur is Latin for does not follow, which is why we use it to denote jokes that don't have a logical conclusion or a punchline. But the human mind has a curious tendency that is very hard to get rid of, and that's the tendency to make connections. It's the reason why you smile out loud when the Stage 5 boss launches 3 attacks at you at once, and you have text boxes that say fetish, reruns, and bye now. We are wired to seek meaning, and so our brains try to come up with a reason for these things appearing together. I'm not going to tell you what I'm picturing when these 2 plucky zombies come at me with boxes that say the same underwear for days and burgers for dinner tonight. But I'm sure that your mind is weaving its own story around this Mongolian hot pot of words. If you ask me, the lack of any connecting tissue between the bits of text or between the text and the zombie blasting action is what makes it all work. If we look at the lines in isolation, it's like we can see there's some stock phrases and sayings like coming to a theater near you. We can identify tongue twisters like gaily gallivanting German gynecologist or yearningly yodeling Yemen youth worker. There's pure nonsense like my sister is an acrobat. The secret sauce is in how all of this stuff is randomly thrown together for our brains to chew on and come up with our own meaningfully meaningless and LOL funny connections. And it's not just for jokes either. Surrealism began with the Dada movement in the early 20th century. Dadaism encompassed all kinds of art forms, including poetry composed of seemingly unrelated lines. Check out this excerpt from a poem by Tristan Tzara. We note the black shivers under a lens. Is this the feeling, this white spouting, a methodical love, splits my body into rays, toothpaste pastry, transatlantic tickets, the crowds crashed, the column couched in wind, range of rockets on my head. I know it's not exactly the same, but doesn't this kind of sound like some of the stuff in Typing of the Dead? Half a century later, a kind of a related technique called cut-up was employed by the likes of William Burroughs, David Bowie, and Kathy Acker, where they would mix up and splice lines of text to create new connections. Then there's the French collective Oulipo, who deal in all kinds of literary experiments, like writing a novel without using the most common letter in the French language. This is what Georges Perret did with La Disparition. It's also been translated into multiple languages, which blows my mind. Most relevant to us here is a work called 100,000 Billion Poems by Raymond Queneau. It's a set of 10 sonnets, with each line of each sonnet on its own strip of paper, so that the lines can be shuffled independently. This creates more distinct poems than anyone can read in one lifetime. All of these writers and artists did things a little differently, but I think all of them were interested in the unexpected outcomes of a creative process that wasn't totally under their control. But note that I said unexpected, not unplanned. You need to have a method for your madness, but once you have one that works, you can achieve beautiful things. If you're beginning to suspect that next I'm going to call Typing of the Dead a work of experimental literature or something, then, well, it kinda is. We just miss it because of all the zombies splattering into pieces, and honestly, because of how funny and fun to play the game is. We tend to associate experimental art with something difficult to understand and bothersome to experience. And I don't even mean that as a criticism. Pushing boundaries often involves getting somewhat uncomfortable, but there is nothing intrinsic about being experimental that excludes you from being entertaining. Typing of the Dead abides by no rules and takes no prisoners in its smorgasbord of cut-up video game idiot poetry. And it will make you laugh doing so. It should be clear by now that I find Typing of the Dead quite a fascinating game, and not least because of its connection to House of the Dead 2. I'm sure there's some other examples of a case like this where you have two wildly different but equally valid takes on the same game, but common they are not. Of the two, I personally vastly prefer Typing over House. I just feel like it's the richer experience on all fronts, but I have to give House of the Dead 2 full credit for the amazingly bonkers story and presentation, which Typing of the Dead copies over wholesale. Well, apart from the very important change that each of our team members now carries a keyboard, a Dreamcast, and a huge battery strapped to their backs. In addition to all the wonderful stuff that I've been babbling about for a while, this game is also a pitch-perfect, so bad it's good, B-grade horror no-star movie. The story here is so dumb you will mess up your brain cells if you think about it too seriously. You're part of a squad that is battling a villain named Goldman, who's creating these monsters because mankind has been going against the natural order of things or something. I'm not quite sure. And no, I'm not going to read any plot summaries online. Not with chapter titles like A Prelude, Original Sin, or my favorite, Muddy. Though I did watch the intro cutscene for what I imagine must have been the first time of my 20 years of playing this game. And who can blame me when the game flashes a big press enter prompt throughout the story setup. Not that the intro makes the story any better, though I have to admit that Goldman does have a point in that we are going against nature, even if I disagree with his methods. Anyway, the details don't matter. The real joy is in how the plot is delivered. When I was little, we used to play this game where you whisper something into the ear of the person next to you, then that person whispers it to the person next to them, and then when you do this enough times, what the last person in sequence hears is some random word salad. I'm pretty sure that the developers of Typing of the Dead employed a similar kind of method when coordinating the work between writers, translators, and voice actors. The voice work is the glue that holds everything together here. This stuff is fascinating to me because it goes beyond just an amateurish line read. It's like they set out to experiment with emphasis, inflection, tone.
We're meeting G over there.
What?
Amy, Harry, the chaos of this city is increasing.
Well, it's about that. It seems like Goldman.
Wait, we'll talk later.
Well, the 1998 Turing case. Guess who's behind it? It was Goldman. He's the head one of the most eminent financial group and an expert on the genome theory. We have to stop him. People of the AMS, I am Goldman. I don't care if you people try to get in my way or not. In time you'll find out who's right. This is a present from me to you. Look at your left.
Amy! Harry!
Well, friends, I look forward to meeting you people again.
My favorite scene is right before the final battle, where Goldman goes all emotionalist and pulls out some real 4 different character studies for the price of 1 style of acting.
I've been waiting for you, friends.
Goldman! Do you know what you're doing?
I'm fully aware of what I'm doing. Can't you see? Man committed a sin, disturbing the life cycle of nature. The original sin that man is responsible to protect the life cycle. I have made a creature to rule over mankind. This is the final battle. Show yourself, our new ruler, the Emperor.
All of this is bolstered by what seems to be a very literal translation. I am not a native speaker of English, and I'm only a humble learner of Japanese. But even I understand that it's okay to say isoganeba, which means something like it would be good to hurry in Japanese, because the speaker or the subject of the sentence is often dropped when it's clear from context. But if your protagonist goes around repeating, need to hurry, that sounds like an AI trying to impersonate a human being. The same thing with nani, literally what, which is a perfectly fine thing to utter when you're startled by something. But if you react to all kinds of things by just saying what in English, it just makes you a weird person. And this is not even getting into obviously broken stuff like go and prevent the confusion in the city, or lines that seem to reference something that's maybe a thing in Japanese but not in English, like the phrase, remember, there's no such thing as a second chance. One of the boons of making this video was that I learned that you can actually play as the second character even in single player. So now I can play either as James or as Gary, the two most bland generic dudes that ever lived. This is like getting some surprise DLC 2 decades after the original release, which rules. I also kinda got this secret third playable character when my game glitched out and James turned into this random NPC for a while. And this guy means business. The entertainment factor is upped by the overall presentation, which is peak late 90s Sega. Everything that happens is treated as if it was the most dramatic thing in the world. Please look forward to my video on the vending machine cutscene in Shenmue 1. The camera is always twisting and turning
to show
something cool, and the music is constantly going for ridiculous levels of intensity. It's like an action movie score was done by someone with a taste for high BPM electronic dance music. Visually to me, Typing of the Dead has that quintessential Sega Dreamcast / Naomi arcade system look, where everything is kind of chunky, kind of blurry, but very expressive. Some of the faces look kind of unsettling, but otherwise this game is just a big slap of sweet temporary beauty from the Y2K. If eyes are windows of the soul, this basic zombie fellow has a bunch of soul to share with us. And this friend of his looks like his grunge band just signed a record deal with Sub Pop. There's plenty of small touches that give the game a ton of personality, like how the stage 2 boss stumbles backwards into his watery grave in the most fake dramatic way possible. Personally, I think this level of graphical fidelity is perfectly enough for action games that don't take themselves too seriously. Typing of the Dead, Crazy Taxi, LA Riders, 18-Wheeler. Man, 18-Wheeler. I love that game. And I just adore Sega's sense of style during this period. It's like a culmination of 20 years of arcade sensibility, right before the whole scene started to sizzle out. And talking about sizzling out. If you're a writer of any kind, the game's slogan will have a special meaning for you. It's only 3 words long, but it goes straight to the heart of the strange way of living. Type or die. On the surface, the basic premise of Typing of the Dead with all the zombie stuff doesn't have anything to do with anything real life. But this really is what making a living by writing feels like. You either type or you can't afford to live. And trying to hit those deadlines or fit enough jobs to make ends meet can feel like you're keeping approaching death at bay by hitting away at those keys furiously. You have a sprained finger, you have a twitching vein in the temple, but you still gotta keep typing, baby. And when you inevitably slip and fail, it can be quite the blow. When you look at Typing of the Dead through this lens, suddenly it's not that funny or surreal anymore. It's too real. Did I really mean what I just said, or was I just joking? Is the humor in "I've been waiting for you, friends" intentional? And can a masterpiece be created accidentally? Where can I get this suitcase with a Dreamcast, keyboard, and huge battery? And are you just secretly training for Typing of the Dead every time you're typing something in real life? The producer Rick Rubin once said that he likes any music as long as it's extreme. He's worked with both Johnny Cash and Slayer, so I'll take his word for it. I don't know if I like any type of video game as long as it's extreme, though my next video will be on Gary Grigsby's Pacific War. That's a joke. But seriously, being extreme is kind of like being unique. It doesn't necessarily mean that what you're doing is worth doing, but if you manage to pull it off, you can have something real special on your hands. Something that kind of breaks the metrics that we usually use to evaluate art. Everything becomes muddy for a while. But once it clears up, suddenly you have a new way of looking at the world. There's a lot to say about Typing of the Dead. On the other hand, it's a game that's so immediately enjoyable, there's no real need to say anything about it. Just go and play it. It's a game that is extreme about fun factor in a completely unexpected way. It's both a work of experimental literature and fleeting, mindless video game action. And most importantly, it's never too old to party. Thanks for watching.